All right, here we're continuing on with the highly tested Michigan bar exam essay subjects, and we're going to talk about the highly tested topics within these subjects. We left off on personal property. For personal property, the Board of Law Examiners likes to test gifts, lost and mislaid property, and bailments. This is actually it's very highly tested. It's tested virtually every bar exam, and it's predictable in how it's tested. For example, people who missed the February 2020 bar exam question on the last exam, I could tell that they just haven't reviewed past essays, because if they reviewed past essays, they would have been able to get not only a high score, but probably a 9 or a 10 pretty easily on it. And this is typically the case with personal property questions. So make sure that you're aware of gifts. You should know the difference between a gift inter vivos and a gift causa mortis, particularly for a gift inter vivos, like a gift given during life. You should know that it has 3 elements: intent, delivery, and acceptance. You should number these elements 1, 2, 3, make it very clear to the grader that you're able to identify them and apply the law to the facts. For lost and mislaid property, you should know that in Michigan, there's not a great distinction between lost and mislaid property because they're both treated the same under the law. The Lost and Unclaimed Property Act will apply to lost or mislaid property, where a finder has to basically report a finding to law enforcement and can retrieve the property if it's not claimed by the true owner after 6 months. You can see the last sentence under that paragraph on lost and mislaid property talks about abandoned property. Abandoned property has been one of the examiner's favorite issues to test recently. I'm not sure why people miss this issue. Could be because commercial courses aren't reviewing it, or because people just aren't reviewing past essays, but people tend to miss it, so they keep testing it over and over again. And basically, you should know abandoned property has 2 elements. There has to be an intent to abandon the property and an act of abandonment. So if you put something out on the curb because you want to throw it away, you've abandoned the property and anyone can claim it. They just tested this in February 2020, where somebody threw their sunglasses toward the trash can with the intent to abandon them. That's considered abandoned property. Anybody can claim that. Before that, they tested it where somebody put their bar exam books by the dumpster because they were so confident they passed. That's abandoned property because they intended to abandon it. Anyone can claim it. And then lastly, for bailments, you should know the different standards of care that apply to different bailments. So a bailment for the sole benefit of the bailor, bailment for the sole benefit of the bailee, or for the mutual benefit of both parties. In fact, you should be able to recite these 3 standards of care anytime you see a bailments issue tested. Because this is one of the favorite things to test, and they will expect to see all 3 standards of care in most cases. Again, so the key with personal property, like the key with most of these, is to review recent essays so that you know what could be coming up, you know how things are tested, and you're familiar with how the board tests things. Because not every single essay will be predictable. You'll see some things that will surprise you on the Michigan bar exam, but you'll also see some things that shouldn't surprise you. And personal property is usually one of those subjects that don't surprise many people in terms of how it is tested. Okay, next, corporations. Corporations can be tricky for people who did not take this class in law school. My general advice is have a good, bigger picture about the role of directors and shareholders. Understand directors manage the corporation. Shareholders own the corporation, but they're not really doing the day-to-day management of it. Once you kind of understand this bigger picture and you get the vocabulary down, it's much easier to know the details, like about meetings, voting agreements, proxies, all these little nuances that are tested. Fiduciary duties tend to be tested pretty frequently. The duty of care, the duty of loyalty, particularly the business judgment rule. So I would review past essays because it's one of the most common things that they like to test. Direct versus derivative actions tend to be pretty popular. On the Michigan bar exam, this was just tested in February 2020. Again, it's something that you should be pretty familiar with because it comes up a lot. Workers' compensation is the next subject. This is actually not tested as frequently as it was. It used to be tested virtually every bar exam because the Board of Law Examiners had a few workers' comp attorneys on their board, but now there aren't any. So you'll see it come up, but sometimes it's tested in kind of a wacky way, and it doesn't come up every exam. They like to test medical benefits. An employee generally will recover medical benefits, even if they have a pre-existing condition. For most pre-existing conditions, you have to show a medically distinguishable change in pathology. even if the employee is negligent, even if they're engaging in horseplay, unless it's intentional and willful misconduct. And even if they're collecting benefits from other sources, they can usually recover. They just can't double dip. This has been tested multiple times, medical benefits. Weekly wage loss benefits is their favorite thing to test, though. Remember that an employee will receive weekly wage loss benefits if they're disabled. Disabled has nothing to do with how you physically look or feel. Instead, it's just defined as a loss of wage earning capacity. So if you cannot earn your same wages that you could prior to the injury, then you may be considered disabled. Just showing you can't go back to your previous job does not mean you're disabled. Instead, you'll have to go through this 4-part test, which is detailed in several past Michigan bar exam essays. So make sure that you know this. These came from the Sinkton and Stokes cases, but now they're part of our statute. So make sure that you know the test for disability. Next, professional responsibility. This actually has not been tested since July 2016. The board realized that we have the MPRE in Michigan, and they actually told law schools that they're not testing professional responsibility anymore. Prior to July 2016, it was basically tested every single exam, and then they just suddenly stopped testing it. So they've held true to their word. Note that it is still technically part of the rules as to what's fair game to be tested on the Michigan bar exam. So you still have to review it because it's still one of the subjects that could be tested, even though they said that they weren't going to test it. It tends to be kind of all over the place, honestly. Some of their favorite things to test are fees, confidentiality, and conflict of interest rules. So again, you should review it, even though it's less likely to come up now than it had been in the past. Lastly, wills or trusts is typically tested, one or the other, usually not both. I would recommend that you review the highly tested topics within both of these. Wills has been super predictable recently, and it's been tested a lot more than trusts has recently and historically. So things like validity of a will, a holographic will, who is a child for intestate share purposes, what are the wife's options if she doesn't like what she gets in the will? Maybe she's left out of the will, or she gets $1 or someone's $1 million estate or whatever. These tend to come up over and over again in wills questions. Wills can be tricky, but it is kind of predictable. Trusts are also very predictable. When a trust question does come up, they often ask about validity of a trust. We use the mnemonic "can't I be done studying" to remember the 5 elements: capacity, intention, beneficiary. The trustee needs duties, and the same person cannot be the sole trustee and sole beneficiary. So I would know these 5 Michigan-specific elements because they come up a lot. If your commercial course teaches something generic about how to create a trust, ignore what they say and learn these 5 elements because the essay grader will be looking for these elements. Other topics they like to test are validity of a testamentary trust, an oral trust, which is valid under Michigan law if you can prove it by clear and convincing evidence, pet care trusts. They like spendthrift trust issues, CPRE, and questions regarding a settlor's intent. So again, review these issues, specifically focusing on past essay questions. All right, in the next part of the series, we're just going to talk about some of the less tested essay subjects, and we'll talk about some of the topics that you see within those essay subjects.